She was 21, homeless, and down to her last $10. No family, no address, just a worn backpack, a wool sleeping bag that used to belong to her mother, and a habit she'd had since she was 8 years old, tracing the blank spaces on maps with her finger. Not the roads, the spaces between the roads. The places nobody marked because nobody went there. Most people look at a map and see how to get somewhere. Sage Marlowe looked at a map and saw where she already belonged. That's the first thing worth paying attention to, because it turns out that knowing what you actually want, not what's practical, not what makes sense, not what other people can understand, is rarer than any amount of money. And it matters more. Sage grew up outside Spokane with her mother Sylvia, a bookkeeper at a feed store, a quiet woman who preferred quiet streets and thought her daughter's obsession with wilderness was a phase. It wasn't. By 14, Sage was hiking alone for 3 days at a time, catching buses to trail heads with borrowed gear. By 17, she had 800 miles of trail behind her, mostly solo, mostly off-trail. She knew how to filter water from a moving creek. She knew which plants wouldn't kill her. She knew how to start a fire in the rain. Then her mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. Sylvia was Sage's only family, and after she was gone, there was no lease, no car, no savings, nothing to stay for. Sage packed everything she owned into one backpack and walked out of the house for the last time on a cold morning in March, with $400 to her name. For 2 years she moved. Apple picking, hostel dishwashing, trail crew work for the Forest Service in the Cascades, $11 an hour, swinging a Pulaski axe, building water bars on muddy trails, sleeping in a tent 3 miles from the nearest road. She would have done it for free. But seasonal work ends when the seasons change, and by 21 she was exhausted from being in transit. She didn't want an apartment. She didn't want a lease or a credit check. She wanted somewhere remote and difficult and hers. Somewhere other people had given up on, because the things nobody wanted were the only things she could ever afford. She found the listing on a library computer in Coeur d'Alene. The Forest Service occasionally auctioned off old administrative buildings, fire lookouts, ranger stations, work camps. Most had sold years ago, but some sat in legal limbo. The one she found was a district ranger station in the Salmon Chalice National Forest in central Idaho. It had been built in 1927, used until 1971, and had been sitting empty for over 50 years. The county had been trying to sell it at tax auctions since 2008 with zero success. The asking price was $10. The catch, 14 miles from the nearest paved road. 8 of those miles on a forest road closed October through June. The remaining 6 miles on a foot trail that climbed over a 7,200-foot pass. No electricity, no running water, no phone. Nearest town Stanley, population 116. Sage looked at the listing for a long time. Then she pulled up a topographic map and found the parcel a small blue square in a sea of contour lines. She traced the trails, measured the elevation gain, looked at where the creeks ran and where the south-facing slopes would catch the most sun. Then she opened a new tab and searched for bus schedules from Coeur d'Alene to Stanley. 2 weeks later, she was standing at the trailhead with 22 pounds of supplies on her back, looking up at a snow-streaked granite ridge. She made the crossing in 2 days. The first day she covered the forest road, steadily, the way trail crew work had taught her, 1.5 miles per hour, no faster. She camped that night beside a frozen creek, eating cold bread and cheese, watching stars appear one by one over the ridge. Below freezing by midnight. She put her water bottle inside her sleeping bag so it wouldn't freeze and slept the deep, heavy sleep of someone whose body had been working all day. The second day she climbed to the pass. At 7,200 feet, wind hit her from both directions. She stood in it for a moment and looked back the way she had come, then forward the way she was going. Nothing but mountains in either direction. No roads, no buildings, no power lines, just rock and snow and sky. She arrived at the cabin just before sunset. Dark stained logs, steep green metal roof, a covered porch on the south side, a stone chimney rising from the west wall. Behind it, visible through the trees, a 60-foot fire lookout tower, leaning slightly, still standing. She stood at the edge of the clearing and didn't move. The light was the color of copper. A raven called somewhere in the distance, and the sound carried impossibly far in the thin mountain air. The door was locked, but the wood was soft, and when she put her shoulder against it, the latch gave. Inside, a single large room, pine plank floors dark with age, a stone fireplace with a timber mantel, an old cast-iron cook stove, a heavy wooden table, 2 chairs, a cot frame, a bookshelf. Everything covered in dust. Everything exactly as the last ranger had left it in 1971. In the corner, beside the bookshelf, stood a gray steel cabinet. Government issue. 4 feet tall. Locked, she found 3 keys on a nail above the door. The third one, small and steel, fit the cabinet lock. She turned it slowly. Inside were hundreds of maps, topographic surveys, fire boundary maps, hand-drawn route maps, organized by region and labeled in pencil. Some of them were rare USC surveys from the 1930s. Some were the kind of thing map collectors paid serious money for. But on the bottom shelf, behind the maps, were 3 canvas bags tied with twine. She lifted one. It was heavy. Inside was money. Old paper bills bound in stacks with paper bands labeled by year. 1962, 1963, 1964. She opened the second bag. More years. The third bag the same. She counted it all on the dusty pine floor with the late afternoon light coming through the western windows. $39,800 in old bills, organized by year from 1958 to 1971. At the back of the cabinet was a leather portfolio. Inside was a single typed letter on Forest Service letterhead, dated June 1971. The man who wrote it was named Mason Chevalier. He had served as district ranger of the station since 1958, when he was 27 years old. For 13 years, the cabin had been his home and the mountains had been his responsibility. He had maintained the trails, cleared the fire roads, kept the lookout tower in working order. He had helped bury the dead from 3 search and rescue operations and helped deliver 1 child whose mother had miscalculated her trip. He had, in his words, loved this country with the kind of love that does not require explanation. When the Forest Service closed the station as part of a consolidation and offered him a desk job in Salmon, he declined. He was moving to Alaska. He was not coming back. And the money he had saved, a portion of every paycheck for 13 years, stored in cash in the cabinet, because the cabin was free. The food was mostly caught or grown, and the only thing he bought regularly was coffee. That money he was leaving behind. Not for the Forest Service, he wrote. They had decided this place wasn't worth their attention, and he disagreed, and he would not reward that decision with his savings. He was leaving it for whoever came next. If someone bought the property, it would go to the buyer. If a hiker broke in, it would go to the hiker. If the cabin sat empty for 100 years and burned, the money would burn with it, and that was also acceptable. What he wanted was for the money to belong to someone who valued the place. Anyone who walked 14 miles to get there and opened a Forest Service cabinet with the key he left hanging by the door had earned the right to whatever he'd left behind. He would trust the mountains to decide, the way he had trusted them for 13 years. At the end of the letter, he left maintenance notes. The roof was good for another 20 years if she kept the snow off it. The chimney needed repointing. The lookout tower was structurally sound, but the cab needed new windows. Don't climb it in high wind. The west window sticks in damp weather. There was a spring 200 feet north behind a boulder shaped like a turtle. This place taught me everything I know about being alive, he wrote. I hope it teaches you too. Sage read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the portfolio, walked outside, stood on the porch, and said out loud to no one and everyone, I'm going to take care of it. She spent the first night on the floor in her sleeping bag, listening to the pines. She didn't light a fire. She wanted to spend that first night the way Mason might have spent his before he'd made it his own. In the morning, she found the spring exactly where the letter said it would be, cold and clear and tasting faintly of stone. She found the woodshed with several cords of lodgepole pine that Mason had cut and stacked over 50 years ago, dry as bone, ready to burn. She found the outhouse still standing, the pit long since composted into dark, rich soil. Over the following weeks, she made the cabin livable. She scrubbed the floors and replaced the chinking in the worst gaps. She cleaned the cook stove and the fireplace, scraping out decades of creosote. She inventoried every map in the cabinet, carefully unfolding each one, checking its condition, refolding it along the original creases. She would later sell 6 of the rarest through a map dealer in Boise original USGS surveys from the 1930s and raise $11,000 she hadn't counted on. Every 2 weeks, she walked the 14 miles out to the road, rode a bicycle she kept locked at the trailhead, caught a shuttle van into Stanley, ate a cheeseburger and a chocolate milkshake at the diner run by a woman named Phyllis, who started saving the local paper for her by the 3rd visit. Then she rode back, locked the bike, and carried everything 14 miles uphill. Each trip, she learned what she actually needed. Less than she had thought. Salt, coffee, flour, beans, rice, dried fruit, soap, books from the swap box on the front porch of the Stanley bookstore. She carried in a solar panel over 3 trips. A mattress rolled and strapped to her pack frame that took her 2 days to haul because she couldn't cover the full distance with that weight in one go. She fixed the chimney with a bucket of cement mixed with creek water. She replaced the broken porch boards with lumber she split from a fallen lodgepole using a wedge and a maul. She repaired the woodshed roof with cedar shakes she split by hand from a tree she found half a mile down the trail. She filled the bookshelf along the east wall field guides, history books, novels, the wilderness writings of every author she could find: Sigurd Olson, Edward Abbey, Aldo Leopold, Annie Dillard, Barry Lopez. Over 200 books by the end of the first year, every one of them carried in on her back. One afternoon she climbed the lookout tower. At the top, inside the small enclosed cab, she stood and looked out at a view that stretched more than 80 miles in every direction. Mountains and forests and rivers and meadows, no roads, no buildings, no power lines, just the world as it had been for 10,000 years before anyone built anything in it. She stood there for almost an hour without moving. Then she started crying, not because she was sad, because she had spent her entire life looking at maps, dreaming of standing exactly where she was standing, and she had not believed until she got there that the dream could actually be real. The world had not given her many things in 21 years, but it had given her this, and this was more than enough. She started keeping a journal. She wrote about the weather, the wildlife, the way the light changed, about a black bear that walked through the clearing in May and ignored her completely, about a great gray owl that began roosting in a tree near the cabin and hunted voles in the meadow at dusk, about the way lodgepole pines smelled in the morning when the sun first hit the bark and released the resin into the cold air. By the 4th month, the cabin was a home in every sense that mattered. Food in the cupboards, a fire in the stove, books on the shelves, boots by the door, maps on the table. She didn't see another person for 47 days at one point, not because she was hiding, but because nobody came that way. The trail appeared on no modern hiking map. 4 or 5 times a season, an experienced backcountry traveler who had heard of the place from an old guidebook might pass through. A retired biology professor doing a survey of subalpine fungi, a solo-through hiker on a self-designed route from Yellowstone to the Sawtooths, a pair of young men retracing their grandfather's 1962 elk hunting route. She always offered them coffee. She always let them sit on the porch and look at the lookout tower. Most of them stayed an hour or two and walked on. Some asked how she had ended up there. She would tell them the short version. Her mother, the Forest Service listing, the $10, the walk over the pass. They listened the way backcountry travelers listen to stories that explain things they're still trying to figure out themselves. In late September, Sage sat on the porch and watched the sunset over the western ridge. The aspens had turned gold. The first dusting of snow had appeared on the highest peaks the night before. The air smelled of cold, coming not as a future event, but as a present arrival. She thought about Mason Chevalier, a man she had never met, who had loved this exact place for 13 years and trusted it to outlive him. She thought about her mother, who had watched her trace green spaces on the road atlas at 8 years old and thought it was a phase. Maybe Sylvia had always known. Maybe she had known what kind of person Sage was going to be from the beginning, and had only hoped the world would be gentler with her than it usually is with people who don't fit. The world had not been gentle, but that didn't matter, because Sage hadn't needed gentle. She had needed remote. She had needed difficult. She had needed a place that other people had given up on, because giving up is a privilege available to people who have options. And Sage had never had options. And so she had learned not by choice, but by necessity to want what other people threw away. That was the real gift Mason had left her. Not the money, though the money was real. Not the maps, though the maps were beautiful. The real gift was the cabin itself. The proof that someone decades before she was born had loved this exact place and trusted it to outlive him. The proof that she was not the first person to walk into a wilderness and decide to stay. The proof that the want she had carried inside her since she was 8 years old was not a phase, not a fantasy, not something she needed to grow out of. It was a real thing, a thing other people had felt before her. And the mountains had been holding space for it the whole time. Here is what the mountains already knew. The places that pull at you are not random. They are the slow accumulation of every decision other people made before you, decisions to love something, to protect it, to leave it standing for someone who hadn't arrived yet. The cabin was not Sage's because she paid for it. It was Sage's because Mason had paid for it first with 13 years of his life, and had trusted that the right person would eventually walk 14 miles to find it. The right person always does. The question is whether you're willing to make the walk. Sage Marlowe was 21 years old, homeless, and down to her last $10. She spent it on a condemned ranger station 14 miles from the nearest road in the mountains of central Idaho. It was the best $10 she ever spent.